Okay, so welcome to Retech, and today we're going to talk about another one of the Cambridge scientists or computer scientists that are kind of intrinsically linked together. We've covered Alan Turing and Maurice Wilkes, and we've also covered Douglas Hartree, but now we have to cover Andrew Herbert. And this is not an in-depth kind of life story about Andrew Herbert. This is more of a kind of notes on a recent chat I had with him, because originally I emailed him to ask him if he would do a little piece about himself and about his life, and you know, he did it. He's agreed to doing that, and which is great. But before that happens, I just want to cover a few things on what we discussed, because it's kind of apt when we think about what's happened in the recent press, and it's also very apt when you think about what's been going on with computing at the moment. So let's have a quick kind of almost fireside chat about, you know, what we kind of talked about. But Andrew Herbert, for those of you who don't know, he's kind of the quiet, seems to be a bit of an unsung hero in the computing world. He started off in Leeds, went to university in Leeds, and then after that he went to Cambridge, or University of Cambridge, and he was basically a protege of Maurice Wilkes, which is where it all links together. He did a few projects with under the guise of Maurice Wilkes, and which we'll go into in a later video in more in-depth kind of research into Andrew. And but he also throughout that time, from the Cambridge University times up until around about the mid-90s, he created a few companies which you may or may not know about. One of them is Digitivity, which was eventually sold to CITRIX, and I think we've all heard of CITRIX. And one of the things that Andrew said at the time is that they needed to look at the internet, basically being online and so on, which they actually pushed back at him for a long time. Can you imagine that nowadays, that people saying that, oh, we need to push back against the internet? You know, so he was way ahead of his time and his thinking compared to what a lot of larger companies were at the time. Now, apart from that, he became involved in Microsoft, and within Microsoft, if you don't know his work, he did F#, and he also one of the biggest things he did with Microsoft, which to most people would be, he stopped the blue screening, because this was the time when the antitrust laws were around in Microsoft, kind of mid-90s era, and basically the US government wanted to break up Microsoft at the time, and there was a huge big kind of court case about it as well, and there was a big antitrust case and so on. And it was around this time that anybody who used Windows at around this time realized that they were, or Microsoft was kind of throwing out software, and they were throwing it out into the wild and hoping that the bugs would be found and rectified in the wild rather than, you know, doing it all in-house. But it was kind of the open kind of administration architecture of Windows at the time, because everybody was an administrator as far as their software was concerned. Now, Andrew Herbert was one of the ones who, or the major player in stopping the blue screen. He brought less of a Wild West kind of attitude to having drivers signed off and so on. So, you know, he brought more of that into a kind of an in-house collective, rather than all of these kind of driver sets that would eventually crash Windows. And that's when, at the time, we got lots and lots of blue screens. Now, that will go into a little bit more detail later in a separate video, because it's quite a long kind of way he got to that point, and also with these Digitivity and CITRIX and the other projects he did within the university. Now, what I wanted to talk about with this kind of fireside chat kind of thing, I was in I'd sent him an email. I was invited round. I went out round to his house, and we sat on his lounge in the garden, and we kind of started talking about. Really, it was aimed to be talking about himself a little bit, but we kind of got into more of a chat, and he brought up a few things which I kind of think that is relevant to today. The first thing, he's very, very passionate about technology as a whole. He's very passionate about artificial intelligence. He's passionate to a point where he thinks that we need to invest more in AI, and AI could do a lot more. AI could do a lot more in scientific work. It could run experiments in kind of the virtual where we could never do in reality. So pushing that kind of thing forward is a big kind of project for himself, and something he's been trying to kind of force through or push through ever since his career within Microsoft itself. And with AI at the moment, we all know we're kind of at the shallow end of the gene pool as far as AI is concerned, because we're basically at the limited end. We haven't taken the next leap to generalized AI, but that's a huge, huge step. Now, Andrew Herbert as well was given an honour in 2010, and he became OBE, which was brilliant because, to be honest, people like this need to be recognised within the industry, and he got his recognition from the government, and you wouldn't really kind of know it talking to him, because he's just Andrew, if you know what I mean. He's down to earth, nice to chat to, and he's a very, very nice guy, and it was nice to spend some time with him rather than a few short bursts in the past. And when you're kind of working, or you're in a working environment, that's what happens. So it was nice to just have a chat and listen to what somebody had to say about the past and the future. Well, relating to his past, he's heavily involved with the National Computer Museum, Bletchley Park, and he's also involved in regenerating or rebuilding or recreating, is probably more of a better word, of Maurice Wilkes's EDSAC, and he managed to raise quite a lot of money initially to get that kicked off. I think he probably got about £250,000 initially to start the ball rolling. And he's also a trustee now for the museum, and he's really passionate about people or children learning IT. Now, he doesn't mean the ICT version of IT, or the let's use some packages, or let's use Microsoft products, which is what's generally been kind of the way that people have viewed IT up until fairly recently, especially in the UK, when they introduced computer science back to the curriculum. And but the problem with that is kids and students, and they think that computer studies and computer science is now too hard, and there's not a mass take up on it anymore. It's not like the early 1980s where people took it up in their droves because it was a new and kind of very exciting industry or prospect. So that's something I think he feels that needs to be worked on. But also he believes that children should know what's going on under the hood, not just what's in front of the screen. So it's more of what's behind the screen, the mechanics, so to speak, of the computing world, which he doesn't feel is pushed enough. And I kind of agree with him on that, because we've had decades of just using products rather than inventing and creating and programming. So we're sort of on the same page in that respect, because I do believe that we're losing our kind of creativity, because a lot of the programmers and a lot of the pioneers that were around in the early to late 1980s are still there now, still doing the same work, still being pioneers of sorts within the sort of programming and IT industry. And not disrespecting these guys, they should have been ousted by now by the new generation of programmers and developers and so on, but that doesn't seem to be happening, which is a bit of a shame really. And I think Andrew's got kind of the same take on things. He believes that we should be pushing more technology-based subjects and making it easier and more open for people to learn. And I completely agree with him in that, in that setting. It's really hard not to agree with that. And Andrew also stated that he believes that it should be more accessible as well, and that's something I've been kind of banging on for ages, is that computers and computer hardware and the kit to learn should be universal now. We should have a universal machine, a very low-cost computer that anyone could have access to, anyone could buy very cheaply. Schools could even give them out, as a starter machine and so on, or for something that kids can kind of do their homework on, etc. And to pick up kind of how to create and how to program and how to do things on a very simple computer. It doesn't have to be as complicated or as complex as our current desktop, laptop, tablet PCs, because it needs to be a product that you could learn with and grow with, kind of almost in the vein of the early sort of microcomputer era, where you would start off with something simple and you would expand it and learn with it. But that doesn't seem to happen now, and he's kind of on the same wavelength as a lot of us, including I think you might have seen a video called with Dr. Mark Isles, and he's kind of on very kind of similar kind of track as well with that thought. It seems like most people within the industry, or who have been around for a long time within the industry and within the world of computing, etc., kind of feel the same. Now, Andrew Herbert is still heavily into computing. He's still heavily into supporting computers, and he's very heavily into kind of making the kind of learning experience for children as well. So it seems like we're all kind of bouncing around on the same page, and we need to pull it together. We need to have kind of a coherent plan to pull things together, and kind of guessing that we will get there eventually, but we've got to kind of push it forward. And I think you'd agree with me, and others would agree, that we need to kind of get something moving now, and really before it's kind of too late, before we've kind of really closed the door. So he was a really, really nice guy, very nice to chat to, very open in his thoughts, and I hope that you'll listen to my hopefully next video very soon with his own thoughts on his own career and subjects. But his career has spanned from the Maurice Wilkes days all the way through to the modern Microsoft days, through research systems for Cambridge, through developing network systems, all the way through to the modern day. And that's a massive career, and it's something that I don't think many people know or may have even heard about. One of the other things before I go is that he's mentioned data centers quite a lot, and he's very much into reducing the power consumption of data centers, the cooling, the amount of power they use, even the physical size of these things as well. And he's right, because in recent articles, there was even an article run recently saying that if you save one email a day, just within the UK, you will save hundreds of thousands of tons of CO2 emissions just by reducing your email count by one, because the amount of power and resources it takes to send your email from your company or your home to somebody in Australia or America or Germany or France or wherever it is quite power hungry, because you've got to think of how many cables it's gone down, how many exchanges it's gone through, how many data centers it's been bounced around to, how many telephone or telephony systems it's actually used, whether it's broadband or copper or so on, and they all use power. Everything uses power, and he's right, we should really be looking at reducing the power consumption of these things. And that's in the same way as I believe we should be reducing the power consumption of computers you use every day at home. Do you really need a powerful desktop PC which consumes a massive amount of power with its fans going, its super cooled processors now, its drives running, its monitors running, and so on, just for you to, don't know, check your email on, or update your spreadsheet, or send a Word document, or send an email? Do we really need that amount of power on a desktop for your general day-to-day stuff? And I don't believe we do. And I think this is where kind of a smaller generation of lighter, less power hungry, even less powerful machines come in to play for general use. We don't need the amount of wastage that we put into our current machines. I mean, if you think about the early micros, a lot of them ran on 5 volts, 9 volts, not massively power hungry on the machines themselves. You know, you've got your average desktop PC which needs a constant supply, switchable power supply, ranging from 12 volts to 5 to 3 and so on. So they're switching and using power in 3 different ways on the same board all the time, and they're drawing a lot of power. Do you actually need that noisy box in the corner of your room just to send an email or update your finances or work on your next book or whatever you're doing? Because most people these days don't play games a lot on PCs. There is a big kind of generation of gamers that still use PCs, but there's not the generation of gamers that are in the same vein as your Xboxes and your PlayStations and so on. You know, we should go back to lower power and lower power consumption models, and it all kind of harks back to maybe a low power universal machine that every home should have just to do general everyday stuff. You know, your mobile phone doesn't consume a lot of power, and I'll guarantee you'll use that more than you'd use your desktop PC at home, which is probably on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, whirring away in the corner for you to use occasionally or sporadically. And he's got a point. He has a huge point, and maybe there's something to be done in that. But it was a great chat, and this is just a little snippet, and hopefully we'll be able to get some more content out with Andrew's own words about his own career through the decades, basically. Because when I first sent an email to him, I jokingly said, you know, you're the pioneers of where we are today, and he said, so I'm old school. Or rather his words were, I didn't realize I was the old guard. But he is, in a sense, because he harks back really to the kind of glory days of research days, when things were new and fresh and huge, to where we are today. So anyway, thanks for listening to this, and thanks for watching, and I hope you like this little snippet of somebody's massive career in the IT industry who's influenced millions upon millions of people, and somebody you probably would have never heard about. So thank you, and I hope you subscribe. Goodbye.